Hello and welcome to a new episode of Good Morning L&D. One I've been really looking forward to, and the reason why, for those of you who know me a little better, I'm a big fan of wisdom, because I believe in times of change, there are things that, hold true even through all this change. And so I'm super happy and proud that our guest today brings a lot of experience in the context of L&D. He's been the former head of people development at BBC. He's been part, for example, of the advisory board and member of the Penn CLO doctoral program. He's been the he's still the co-presenter of Learning Now TV. He's chairing Iventive events every other week, it feels like, running those discussions with the leading L&D heads globally. And he's an author, right? He wrote books like The Learning Challenge, Building Leadership Programs That Work, Workplace Learning, How to Build a Culture of Continuous Employee Development, and the list goes on. So let's welcome our guest for today. Welcome, Dr. Nigel Paine. I'm so happy to have you.
Moritz, that's incredibly kind of you, and it's a delight to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too, because there's so much I learned about you. I mean, just, studying your career, studying your work has been for me a learning experience. And now it's an honor, to talk to you about all that. And just to give you and the audience a feeling, right, of who is, Dr. Nigel Paine. I came across a story from your childhood, a tinkering, story. And it's the one where you basically dismantled, everything kind of you found at home, which has been, I guess, a horrifying experience for your parents. But for me, this story was kind of a symbol, I guess, of, who's this person sitting in front of me. Take us to your childhood. No, this is not a therapy session, but
no,
I think it's still a story that somehow stands for itself.
I was an annoying child. I think I have to say that, and I certainly managed to irritate my father much more than any other reaction from him. And the case in point was that he had this marble carriage clock on the mantelpiece, which used to tick away, and it used to get wound up every few days. And I sometimes was designated the role of winding it up. And he was out, everyone was out. And I just looked at this clock and thought, I wonder how it works. And I used to do that all the time. How does it work? I remember once standing watching a workman with a pneumatic drill. I'm thinking, how does that work? Because there's no electricity. How does it work? And it's compressed air. And I worked out exactly how it worked. It must be a chamber that air is forced into, and then it's released, and the spring pushes it back and forward. So I went to talk to the workman and said, this is how it works. And he said, I don't care. I don't know how it works. There's nothing to do with me. I just use it to dig holes. So anyway, I went back to this clock, and I just took a little bit of, took it out of the case, and I looked at it and thought, I wonder how you unscrew that, and then you can Anyway, I ended up with about 40 bits on the table, and I realised how it worked. I saw the spring and the cogs and everything, and the hands and how it worked. So I thought I better put it back together again pretty quickly. So I assembled it back again, and as I put it back in its case, there was one little piece not left on the table. I thought, oh my God, what do I do now? Because I had no idea where this piece came from. Anyway, I put it back quickly. My father came in, and I don't know how he noticed. He walked straight up to the clock and said, what have you done? And I just said, and he said, don't give me, and he went crazy. And that was a story of my childhood. I set myself up for being punished. And I had this ridiculous, insatiable curiosity. I remember as a child sticking my fingers in the electric socket and getting a shock, really jumping backwards. And then not content with that, thinking, did that really happen? I did it again. I put my fingers back in the socket. And I got an even worse shock. And then I realized you shouldn't put your fingers in the socket. So I took things apart. I took my own things apart more than I took anyone else's. And it was always interesting. And I still like taking things. This is a terrible admission. I still like taking things apart. You know those programs where they disassemble a MacBook Pro. They sit down. The video is taking apart a MacBook Pro. I can watch those forever. And I wouldn't do it because I wouldn't want to not have the one bit missing because they cost a lot of money. But if that was my job, taking apart MacBook Pros, I would be happy taking them apart and just, I love the way things fit together and how clever it is. I always think of the brains behind fitting things together. It's like when I go into factories and I look at machines, I can't just look at a machine. I've got to work out how that machine actually works and then think of the brain behind that machine. And I can see what it does, but the difference between seeing what it does and working out from scratch how a machine could do that job is endlessly, to me, crazily, endlessly fascinating, endlessly interesting. So yeah, sadly, I'm still that child who takes things apart and annoys everybody.
Yeah.
Because
and I think this is I
don't
love
often get
I love
together
it. I
again.
love where the conversation is going, because this is exactly what I hope, because taking things apart, right? A few years later, from this childhood scene you just described, you took apart basically L&D, right? What does it mean to
Yes,
organize
yes,
learning, in an
yes,
organization? How does it work?
yes,
How doesn't it work? The
yes,
same with leadership
yes,
development, and the
yes,
list goes on, right? So this is, one
yes,
of this, talking about wisdom, I think, one of these pieces. And the other piece, which I found is also one of your wisdom, is that learning happens in discomfort, right? And maybe that's
yes.
also something you already learned back then, right? Knowing your father will
Mm.
come home any moment, right? And asking the question, what have you done? And 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 here we are, right? Straight in the wisdom
Yes,
of
it's
Dr.
true.
Nigel's,
I,
Paine
I,
and L&D
yes,
experience. And so
I'm, I, I- I'm a systems person, Moritz, from way back. I believe in systems thinking. And systems thinking is about understanding the way the components interact and interrelate. And what drives me crazy is very simplistic reactions to problems in organizations, like it's Moritz's fault or Moritz is a genius. And we never look at the system. Moritz is a genius because he's got this huge, complex raft of support and that helps him. And Moritz is an idiot because he hasn't, and he's got no support or learning. So I try to persuade organizations to think bigger than just individual genius or individual stupidity. It's always more complex than that. And it's always in the system. If you think of the system, you look at the system, you see how, just as I did, you see how this outcome only occurs because of these processes, which are either broken and need fixing or are working beautifully and make it happen. So yes, I guess I'm still that child. And what unlike a lot of authors, I don't write my books because I'm absolutely certain about something. I write my books because I haven't got a clue, because I don't understand. Like the leadership book, I start from a premise, and the premise I started with was, why is it that organizations spend a fortune on leadership development and it has no measurable effect? And other organizations can spend far less money and transform the whole organization. So why do some programs work and some not work? It's a systems problem. So I looked at the components for success and the components for failure. And that's essentially all the book is. It's just saying, if you do this, it's not going to work, regardless of how much money you put into it. If you do this, it could work. And that doesn't, and regardless of how much money you put into it. And with learning culture, I wanted to understand what is a learning culture? It's hard to define. And how does it work and how do you get one? And what are the component parts of it? The book was that exploration. And I came out with answers. In both of those cases, I came out with answers saying, that's the reason. That's why learning culture works. This is how it comes together. And I often, I get attacked because it's not, I haven't got a simple message, which is give Moritz a bonus because he's very smart and he'll do everything, or fire him because he's useless. I don't think either of those recourses take it in effect. The word that haunted me for years, context. Everything happens in context. Nothing happens in vanilla. And leadership programs without context are failed leadership programs. I've never found anyone who could persuade me otherwise. And I've asked, and I've looked at hundreds of leadership programs. So that is me. I'm very curious to work out the system and understand the system and understand the culture. But I'm really not obsessed with individual genius or individual failure. Because as soon as you start blaming individuals, I think you're on a long, slippery slope, or overpraising individuals. You're on a very long, slippery slope, because you then ignore context and you ignore the system, and it will catch up with you eventually. So that's my mission. It's a very, very simple mission. The world is more complicated. And that's how I came to Discomfort. I'm sick of people saying to me, well, we've really shortened this down into very easy. It's really easy, as if the world can be boiled down to easy, when every decision that I've ever been involved in, every insight that I've ever got comes from difficult, not from easy. And therefore, I say to organizations, embrace complexity, embrace discomfort. We're on a journey here, and it's a rocky, rocky ride. Embrace these things and you'll get somewhere. If you want it all easy, neat little packages, micro, just simple, two minutes a day, I don't believe all that rubbish. The world is much more complicated than what you can do in 2 minutes a day. So I'm from that reason, I'm a contrarian, I guess. And as a contrarian, yes. I ignore, I make as many people dislike me as I make people like me. I get attacked a lot, but that doesn't stop me. That doesn't stop me.
Yeah, and I would say the good thing about when people dislike you, you made them think, right?
Yeah,
and that's maybe already a first win.
Yeah, so it's an absolute win if you make people think. If you make people pause and think, well, maybe these simple judgments that I'm making, these simple steps that I'm taking aren't getting me where I want to go. That's the breakthrough moment. Then they're listening. And that's all I want, is people to listen and make their own decisions. And not look to me for miracle answers. And people say, what's the solution to this? And I say, it's complicated. And they go, no, give me the solution. Give me the answer. And the answer is, there is no answer until we explore and we get into what's driving your organization. It's obvious, but it's still difficult for people to understand that. So I don't go into an organization and say, right, these are the 5 things you have to do. I go into an organization with humility and say, can I talk to people? Can I try and understand what's driving the issues? Can I try and really dig deep into the issues and challenges? And then we'll come up with something we could try. Not, I have an instant remedy on this piece of paper. And so many people make a living by, these are the 4 key things. This is the acronym that will get you, and you go on YouTube or onto LinkedIn every day. 1,000 people tell you how easy it is if you just follow this, do that, and it's inevitably wrong. Yeah. Inevitably,
it's this kind of blueprint industry, right? That tells you, well, you need good leaders. Here's the blueprint to good leaders.
Yes.
You need good learning culture. Here's the blueprint to the good learning culture, and it all, somehow maybe skips what you say as I understand correctly from your whole experience and career. The most important differentiator, which is the context. And which somehow already entails, well, there is no blueprint.
Exactly. That's exactly right. There is no blueprint. And that's uncomfortable for some people, to think there's no magic answer, and that, I'm not a snake oil salesman, and you're on a journey, and that journey never ends. It's like leadership development should never end. You shouldn't be a leader who's developed because the world is going to turn upside down in 3 weeks. And then where are you if you're fully developed? There's that quote from that it's argued about who the quote's from, about that it's the learners who will inherit the earth. But the learned are already out of date, already obsolete. Yes,
not the knowers, right? Oh,
yes,
I love it.
Exactly.
I mean, we're just 10 minutes in, and let's get deeper in this with them. And I think one thing you already touched is this idea that we learn through dislocation and discomfort, right? That this is also one of the big red threads, you would say. And I even got fascinated from whom you may have also learned this from, Lord David Pudd'nham, a filmmaker, right?
Yes, a film producer. He's a film producer.
Film producer. He won an Oscar Best Movie, and you say, well, this was one of your mentors.
He's a hero, yeah.
And Absolutely. He said something famously, like, you never really, learn unless, you lie awake at night, petrified about what the next day will bring, which in a way is extreme. But
it
I
is
found it
extreme,
super
but
inspiring because it's, I mean, many
yeah,
companies we're working with are in crisis, right? And I see
yes.
those leaders, lying awake at night, but I don't see them seeing it all necessarily as a learning learning curve
No,
or a learning
it,
project, right?
that, exactly right. And it is. You learn when you're discomforted, and when you're at your most threatened is your intense learning, and that intense learning is always a good, I think. So you have to celebrate discomfort and recognize that when it's too easy, when you just there's a formula, it's never going to work. And leaders who lie awake at night worrying need to think through the solution, and the solution is never about them. And one of the things I say to leaders, we're past a world where you've been appointed the CEO, you should know everything. You have the answers.
Yeah.
The answer is that as a CEO, you have the most powerful ability to ask the best questions and listen to the answers, not fail to listen. I spend a lot of time with senior people talking about active listening, which sounds so obvious. And it's almost embarrassing. I always think they're going to see through me. They're going to think, what is he doing? This is so obvious. But they don't. And it is obvious. Active listening. If you sit there and you just observe and you listen and you don't speak, because so many CEOs, their career trajectory is going from listener to not really listening to never listening, from not speaking to speaking a little to just speaking. And you've met people like that. You've met people who are having a conversation with you in theory, but when you ask a question, you can see they're not even paying attention. They're just formulating their clever next comment or their clever next question. And I think that's very sad when people stop learning. Learning is the only way we survive in the world. And somehow we've turned it into something that is kind of limited by what grade job you have or where you fit in an organization. Learning is for everybody. And in this current climate, we are going to have to learn very fast and learn a huge amount. But above all, and that's my last book on organizational learning, we're going to have to share that around the organization. Because I'm more and more, again, the book started with the question, is there such a thing as organizational learning? And I'm convinced that there is. And I'm also convinced there is such a thing as an organizational brain. And the organizational brain is the connections between people. Like your brain has 80 billion neurons. That doesn't make you smart. What makes you smart are the connections those neurons fire constantly. You can't stop. Keep going. And in an organization where the individuals are highly connected, you have the basic groundwork for being a smart organization. And if those individuals are isolated and don't connect or hardly connect, then you're throwing away all that intelligence, all that insight, and all that talent. Because there is such a thing. It's absolutely a thing proved by neuroscience. There is such a thing as collective intelligence. When we work together, our brains begin to align and we end up with 1 and 1 equals 3 or 4, or sometimes 1 and 1 equals 6. We suddenly get these mutual insights buzzing off each other and we're learning really fast. But most organizations see learning as an individual trial. It's something that you do on your own with no one else, with a test to make sure you know what you're supposed to know. And we forget about the brilliance of other people around us. And when you start believing in your own bullshit, you're in big trouble. When you start to really think, well, perhaps I am a genius. I worry. I think you're better off thinking, perhaps I know nothing. That's a better position to start with. I'll learn everything from this group, from this individual, from these people. I think that's a healthier position than I know everything. I'm so experienced. Because every time I go into an organization, I learn. I just learn. I learn. I don't know everything.
And I
Sorry.
think what's so interesting in this is that if I also understood the book correctly, you say, well, we can have the best learning, experiences, programs, and whatever. But if, certain structures and processes in an organization do not support, for example, this collective brain or this collective learning, it will fail, right? And I think one thing that you got a very straight opinion on is, for example, how we incentivize people. right? And
Yes.
do we, incentivize people individually, right, to have, a
Yeah.
stronger competition, or do we incentivize people, right, to collaborate? And I think this is a very strong argument here, because I feel like most learning teams, they wouldn't even go so far, right, to have this standing, the credibility, the voice, right, to voice something like this, to say, look, guys, I mean, if we really want to get organizational learning right, we have to change some structures and processes here, even incentives.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's exactly right. That if you incentivize people to be successful on their own, then why would they take any time to help other people, to share what they know? Because it takes away from their own success or their own KPIs. And I think KPIs, I would stop KPIs directed at individuals, and I'd focus on team achievement, because a team can work out different strengths and weaknesses. So not everyone has to do everything. You could say, I'm the quant person. I'll do all the quant analysis. And someone else say, well, I love doing the writing. I'll be the qualitative person. Someone else saying, I love gathering the data. Let them work as a team and collaborate, because their success will be far greater than if you insist that everybody is qual, writing. You're working against the grain. And I like working with the grain. I think people learn from each other when they're able to excel in their area and do what they do best. And I know I'm hopeless at some things. I'm genuinely hopeless at some things. And when I have to do it, it's uncomfortable. I don't like it, and I don't do very well. I'm much better when someone says, I'll do that, you do this, and we work together. So yes, I would make the minimum unit a team, not an individual. And I
Yeah.
would have team bonuses. And in WD-40 Company, what I loved when Gary Ridge was the CEO, Gary Ridge, all of the managers in WD-40 Company were bonused, were rewarded on the development of their team, not on themselves. Their only role was to help the team live the values. And in helping the team do their job and live the values, that person became a success, because the whole unit, the whole department suddenly became successful. Whereas if you have, I've got my own career and I'll leave the team to sort it all out, then no one is often very successful, or one person is, and the success is very minimal. I don't, people say, well, give me examples of organizations that have done that. Well, there are a few, but I think in the coming years, we'll see this is the direction, I think, the trajectory. So important to work together on problems and
Yeah, for
solve
me,
problems
when
together.
I was thinking about it, yeah, you're very fast in being, oh, this is corporate socialism, right? You already hear, those managers, but then, also connecting to the discussion we had earlier on this superpower of not knowing, right? And asking for help, for
Yes,
example, right?
yes,
I
yes,
just thought back to this case of Microsoft, who, implemented growth mindset. And with that, also this new process of, evaluating colleagues, and colleagues evaluating me based on this question: how often does Moritz ask for help, and how often
yes,
does Moritz, give or helps, others?
yes,
And
yes,
and and and,
yes,
and I think, yeah, it's exactly
precisely.
what you said.
Yep. And if you look at Microsoft, Nadella has systematically taken apart the conventional structure of Microsoft, where they had these massively important EVPs running big divisions like baronetcies. They had castles and knights, and they fought each other, or they ignored each other. They didn't work together. And he's put in place project teams, engineering teams, and I think he's spot on. He realized, I think, that you can't put new wine in old bottles. You can't have a new philosophy and approach in the old structure. The structure has to change. And many of those EVPs have now gone. They've left Microsoft because they couldn't accommodate that new structure. So again, Nadella quietly getting on with it in the background. I admire him hugely, and I admire what he's done for Microsoft. I think it's a completely different organization. I'm one of the few people I met Steve Ballmer. I met him a couple of times in Seattle. And, to say that he was a difficult person is an understatement. And to say that his way of managing was just to set massive dissent alike in the organization. So you fought each other, and the winner became the winner. It worked really well for a long time, because in those days it was all about individual bits of Microsoft growing strongly. And the Nadella era is individual bits of Microsoft working together strongly. And for me, Teams is the perfect embodiment of that. If you take the lid off Teams, it's just a whole bunch of Microsoft products thrown together and then wired together. And it was perfect for the age. It was Microsoft's best-selling ever product, but it didn't come out of nothing. It came out of Microsoft Office. It came out of SharePoint. It came out of Skype. All of the various component parts, and they came together in a holistic product. So you can't say, I'm going now from video to data to connections to community. It's all built in. And so it was a product built of what Microsoft could do best. And I bet that would have been really interesting to have been there in the teething times when people are going, oh, that's my bit, or that's not your bit. But now no one would say, that, what a stupid way to behave, Satya. Why did you do that? It's obvious why he did it. And in some ways, built the whole organization now around the logic of Teams, which is about connection and community, I think.
Wow. I mean, we've just, tapped into the wisdom, but now I would love also to go into the disciplines, let's call it that way, right? And maybe start, with the leadership development piece, because you just said it, right? You when you wrote the book, but also I think in the experience you of your work before, with BBC and so on, you came up with this question, right? Why do we put so much money into, those executive development programs where we bring people to the nicest 5-star hostels and hotels and basically, the impact, right? What's really the impact of those programs is quite little, right? And so you said, okay, we have to change this, and applying also this idea of discomfort and dislocation. One example I came across was this 2016 Antarctica expedition that you did, with the 40 global executive team of a company.
Yes.
And I found, like, is this even possible, right? I mean, and you somehow did this, and this is just one example, but maybe you can, give us a little bit, of your experience. How does that work? And maybe starting with this Antarctica story, right? Because it's unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, I was invited to go by the expedition leader, Robert Swan, who's a great man, who's dedicated his life to preserving Antarctica forever. And the Antarctic Treaty runs out in 2041. And at that point, all bets are off. So his life is to people the world with those who've been there, understand it, and want to preserve it forever. And I did the leadership bit, so that there were scientists, there were a whole bunch of people. So I wasn't doing everything. And when I was on the ice, when we were in the phoenixes going out amongst icebergs, I very much was the learner. I was as terrified as everyone else. And I was just one of that team. But when I was doing the leadership stuff, I was in charge. So it was that balance. So our days were mixed from walking on the ice, sitting in a boat, going round chasing whales, and then focusing on leadership and what we learned. And just digging into that idea of the discomfort of Antarctica. At the very beginning of the expedition, Robert Swan said, what all of you have got to realize is that Antarctica is trying to kill you. It's very seductive. It will make you feel that it's benign, but it's not benign. It will try to kill you, which is why you have to do what you're told and focus on the day by day by day. And that is the best learning opportunity. And it is. It was an amazing learning opportunity. And we journal. I got everyone to journal. And at the beginning, getting people to journal and put down their cameras, their phones, was a nightmare. People just wanted to take pictures of penguins. So I said, how many thousand pictures of penguins will be enough? Do you want to go home and say, what did you do in Antarctica? Well, I got all these hundreds of pictures of penguins. Or do you want to have some more profound conversation? The last session was sitting on the side of a hill, looking out into a most beautiful bay with the ship just small in the middle of the bay somewhere. We got people to sit on the ice and snow and just sum up their thoughts, have a conversation with themselves. And people were in tears. I know it sounds melodramatic, but people were in tears as they were just reflecting. So at the beginning, getting people to write anything was like a nightmare. Getting people off the bay and stopping them writing was a nightmare. So we got to go back to the ship. We go, just one more. I just got one more thought. So that was, I hope that was a profound habit for people. Just sit back and reflect on your experience and just learn from the whole process that you've just been through. What has it told you about yourself? What has it told you about your world? What has it told you about what you want to do and how you want to do it? And we were teams. In a little Phoenix boat, dinghy, the rubber boats, you have 10 people. And the rule was 10 people get on the ice, 10 people come back. End of story. Not 9. You can't have 2 having a wonderful time and 3 people, breaking their leg. You are a team of 10. And one image for me, which really stands in my head, was these 2 young, strapping guys, in their 20s, strong, standing there, arm in one, the other arm in this not old woman, but she was in her 60s or 70s, and they were pulling her up this ice sheet, pulling her up, and they were going really slowly as a result. And they were last back in the boat. But the fact that they saw that she was in difficulty and just did it because it was the team spirit. And for me, my big story was that we got lost on a trek, which is really awful. I ended up climbing across this ice sheet. So I had my gloves off. I was literally nails and my toes and nails trying to get across this sheet with a sheer drop behind me. And as I got almost to the end, I heard this kaboom, kaboom, kaboom. I looked down. My water bottle had come out of my backpack and had tumbled down this ravine. And people were saying, Nigel, you got to go and get it. You can't leave anything. You can't leave plastic. You can't. You could pollute the whole place. So I said, I can't. I can't get down. I'll never be able to get back up, even if I get down there. And there's this guy who was maybe 100 meters away from me. He heard the conversation in the air, and he just came down the hill, just walking down this ice at a speed I could never have done. He got there and said, "What's the problem?" I said, "My bottle's fallen at the bottom. I don't know what to do." And he said, "I know what to do. I'm going to go and get it for you." I said, No, it's too dangerous." He said, "Don't worry." He said, "I'm a skier. It's fine." And off he went down just virtually skiing down the ice. And he got to the bottom, he picked up my backpack, my bottle, put it in his backpack, and he came up. He just went, dung, dung, and he was up in 5 minutes, and he said, "That was great. I really enjoyed that. Thank you for the opportunity." And I said, "How can I thank you? How can I thank you?" And he said, No. He said, "There's other things you can do. You don't have to be able to do that kind of stuff as well." So it was a real community where everyone had to care for everyone else because it was dangerous not to care for everyone else. And I think if you imagine that as a company, imagine working in that environment every day. You go to work and you think, people have got my back. People will care for me and I will care for other people. And how many people find work lonely, miserable, and where no one cares? And people will watch you fail because that's okay, because they're successful, they've done okay. Where it's a real cruel, merciless environment. And I think there's a world where decency and kindness really become extreme productivity, if you can do that. So we were a productive group.
Yeah, it's impressive. And I can really picture it. I mean, just seeing how precise you used to remember, right? These interactions, these moments, what they meant to me. This is for a lifetime, right? This is learning, this is kind of hardwired learning, emotional learning. So just by these simple formula of, dislocation, getting people to a different place, discomfort, where, so strip away ego, where you basically, have this collective decision making in uncertainty. So we know all that, right? But still, if I think about the typical corporate top leadership development program, it's what you said at the beginning, right? It's this fortune industry of sending executives to those 5-star hotel seminars, with the good expensive wine, checking in with HR, and then talking or listening to someone who climbed Mount Everest. And after that, nothing really changes for the people, but
yeah,
also for the team and the organization. And
yeah.
what's
But they don't
what do you
hold
recommend? Mhm.
they don't hold people enough to account. For me, if you've done a leadership program and 2 weeks later nothing has changed, that leadership program has failed. I don't care whether people had a great time, they drank great wine, they had great food, they had good chats in the bar. If nothing has changed, it's failed. So my bottom line for leadership development is about behavior change. Full stop. If there's no behavior change, there's no leadership development. There's just entertainment. And you can entertain people in all sorts of different ways, but don't call it leadership development. Call it entertainment. So that's exactly right. So set your bar, be clear what you want, what the outcomes are, and have the courage to measure that. And set your criteria before and say, if we don't see this happening, we've failed. And be honest about that instead of saying, "Oh, it was you hardly ever meet anyone telling you the leadership program has failed. They go, "Oh, fantastic! Oh, everyone loved it. It was great. Just amazing. We got there," and they don't care. They don't care that nothing has actually happened. It's bad. It's bad. It's a waste of money. Probably billions of dollars in a year. Billions of dollars.
Yeah, I already hear people, well, of course, you can do this maybe for a small group, right? This idea of dislocation, discomfort, and so on and so forth, but you cannot scale this to an organization. But I think you,
True.
proved wrong, right? With, the
Yeah,
BBC, case,
yeah,
where you basically had 6,000 of employees in a massive transformation and also crisis. It was
yeah,
the early 2000s, right? Where
yes,
suddenly, the internet came up and
yes.
digital,
And
became a thing.
digitization. That was the big
Yeah.
thing. We had to digitize an analog organization very, very fast to
Yeah.
stay in touch.
I mean, if
It
you
was
just,
important.
picture this, I think you even said it in one of your interviews, that there have been, these veteran journalists, who have,
Yeah,
been around the world with always this entourage, right, of a camera
yeah,
team, sound, and,
yeah,
everything. And suddenly they were kind of, asked to, here's your laptop, here's your small camera. Now
yeah,
go shoot it yourself, edit yourself, transmit it via a shaky internet connection.
yeah, yeah,
So a massive role transformation, right?
yep.
A transitional moment, not just for the whole media industry, but also for the people within. And I found this
Yes,
so powerful because I feel like there's a big parallel to today, where many organizations are also in this shift to digital, but also, from human to AI. So we
yes.
are facing kind of the same, processes. And I would love to hear what your learnings have been back in the days with, BBC, and what do you believe, can be applied now also in this next shift.
Yeah. Well, what I learned was that it's much more difficult than making a rational argument. To stand up in front of people and say, "This is the future, we have to embrace it, otherwise we're dead," does not convince anybody, because everyone's
Mhm.
thinking, "But I don't want to do this. This is not my job." And we
Mhm.
had a lot of resistance.
Mhm.
But what we turned it into, or tried to turn it into, is a creative experience. So you are now a creator. You are the author of your future. You are crafting, scripting, telling a story about the world. So your story is what's important, not what someone else has put together or what a big team has put together. And the fact that you've got agency now, you are in control. You're not handing over control, makes it much more exciting. So we tried to focus on the excitement and the opportunity to tell a
Mhm.
unique story on your own in a way that you are able to, and gradually that came through. But essentially, you also have to take very hard decisions. You have to say,
Mhm.
"There's a cutoff here. We're not going to accept anything beyond this point. This is it. You're off the cliff. You're either flying or you're not flying. But this is it." And we chopped the analog stuff, the analog kit,
Mhm.
relatively fast and became a digital organization. Now it's just a joke. If you went anywhere in the BBC and said, "Oh, you remember the days when a cameraman and a camera person and an editor and this person or that person all sat with the journalist in order to be able to do anything," they just laugh at you and say, "How ridiculous, how slow." And one of the things that convinced us and convinced the BBC was the bombings in London, the
Mhm.
7/7 bombings, which were grotesque. And what the BBC discovered was that it was the day the team came back from having been awarded the Olympics for 2012. And therefore, all our crews, there was a crew at Heathrow, there was a crew at the reception, all our crews were everywhere, but in the centre of London where the bombings were. So the BBC, suddenly it's got to run a 24-hour news service with no footage. At one point, it's probably telling stories out of school, the BBC was using traffic footage from the Metropolitan Police and just talking over it. So at least it showed movement and it showed London. And crews were frantically called back. But some of my staff, who were the experienced camera technicians, went out on the street with cameras themselves. And one of my staff got this fantastic interview with a surgeon. I just walked into the hospital and said, I'm BBC. And the guy said, I'm not talking to anyone else, but I'll talk to you. And gave the first hint that this was much bigger, many more people had died than had been possible. And another member of staff followed someone coming out from hospital with this young kid. It was amazing. This young Asian child next to this adult saying, are you all right? What happened to you then? Go on, tell me about your story. And managed to capture that on film. The most amazing moments. And that was the key, that you've got to do it yourself. And we had, I don't know, 7 crews or 8 crews in London. We needed 1,000 crews. And so the whole concept of citizen journalists and all of that came out. And we started to invite footage because there was a huge resistance. Don't have footage of, you're encouraging people to do dangerous things to get the right shot. But we ended up with footage from all sorts of places. And you see it now. It's just standard now that you've got professional footage, you've got amateur footage and super amateur footage, coming off webcams or dash cams or body cams, or it's still valid. It's still valid journalistically. So yeah, that was a massive cultural shift to just not being ahead of the game, but just staying up with the game that was happening so fast. Because I remember my staff used to advise on studios, and the BBC standard specification for a studio was £2 million. That basic investment for a basic studio, £2 million. I went to see CNN, and I said, "What about studios?" And they said, "Oh, $100,000 is a studio from us, because we just use standard equipment. We use PCs and we use this software and we do this and we do that." So I went back to the BBC and to my people and said, "Hey, the world's changed. 2 million? No, it's 100,000. They said, "That is not a proper studio. Our standards will never change." And of course, guess what? We're all doing. What is your studio? Because it probably nowhere near 100,000 euros. So we live in a different world, and you have to adjust to that really quickly, or you're left behind.
But in a moment of that, right, this transitional moment for the organization, for the journalists, and so on, for the leaders of the organization, what do you think a people development department can really do, right, to enable this? And I mean, listening to you, it felt very hands-on, just going to CNN, right, and making or building the insights and learnings yourself, and then give it to the organization and share it with the organization. But what would you say are the levers that a people development department really has in those transitional moments?
And the answer is one word: partnership. That people development on its own, its impact is zero. And I was well aware that people would look at me and say, "What the hell do you know about journalism? How many times have you been a journalist? How many times have you put together a news package for News at 10? And obviously, very simple answer to that. But with partnership, you get leverage. And that was what made it work. So we're working with a whole bunch of people, not in any way doing it. And perhaps even having a minor role, just being backup role, putting good material together as resources. And we, I remember we brought a journalist over from Canada who was already there. And that person is speaking to our people and just speaks with authority as a journalist, showing the stuff that they'd done. I could see the scales dropping off people immediately, thinking, he knows what's going on. He's right there. If I could have said exactly the same thing, and they would have looked at me and gone, "What do you know? You don't know anything." So journalists are difficult people to convince. So the best people to convince journalists are journalists, usually. And we also worked in a very simple theory, and that was, if you can get one or two people on your side, let them sell it all for you. So once we'd got a handful of people doing it, they were the ones who told everyone else what to do, because they did it brilliantly. And it gave them status amongst their peers. So I never put myself at the front of all of that and say, I'm the person who knows all about this stuff. I'd much rather we worked in the background, leveraging the resources that were in the organization. And it was a fantastically able organization. When I was there were 27,000 people, many of whom were massive experts, world leaders in their field. Why ignore them and say, oh, no, we can put a package together for you. We don't need you to tell us how to do that. Of course we did. So we used a lot of voices. For example, we used directors to voice over some of their material and say, how did you get that shot? How did you do that? How did that work? What tech were you using? And the director would sit there coming and saying, yes, we did this and we did this, and we couldn't do it in that way. That didn't work. So we had to do this and we had to do that. People are really all eyes and ears. Now, we could have taken that same information and packaged it and said, now, the way you do this is that, but it doesn't have nearly as effect. I learned about the benefits of storytelling very early on in the BBC. BBC is a storytelling organization, and the best way to convince people in the BBC is tell good stories. And we told some great stories, really great stories. And that's how it worked. So it really was not about me. Not at all.
I think as a good storyteller, convincing storyteller, you need a certain, credibility, right? And standing.
Yes.
And
yes.
I think something you have also experienced and observed, and maybe are still observing today, because you're joining those inventive events, talking to, all those, L&D leaders, you're on big conferences like Unleash and so on. So is there still this massive credibility issue, right, that L&D has compared, for example, to the finance department, to the legal department?
Yeah.
And how do we get out of this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the answer is yes. I think you're 100% right. If you're in the finance department or legal department, you have a frame which no one questions. If you're the CFO, you go in and you say, this is the way the world is. This is what we can do. Now, if you look at finance is a conceit, it's a fiction. The whole accounting is based on, let's just assume this and this and this. Let's just assume that everything balances at the end of the financial year. You have to have 0, 0, 0. Everything's zeroed out. That's a fiction. It's all fiction. But we believe it, we take it seriously, and we give those people huge credibility. What I've always said is that in an organization, there is a good CEO manages a number of frames. So there's the financial frame. Yes, we definitely need that. But there's also the imagination frame, there's the marketing frame, and there's the learning frame. And what I ask L&D to be is on a par. Say, this is what this organization needs to achieve its objectives. Doesn't the finance director, he's not saying, I'm just going to talk abstractly about finance. The finance director, he or she is saying, these are the resources that I can get for you that will allow you to achieve your objectives. The learning people should say exactly the same. This is what you need. These are the capabilities that I can build that will help you achieve your objectives. And what you get instead is L&D going in and saying, oh, we can build 5 packages. Much quicker now we've got AI. And no one cares. Who cares? No one cares.
I love the term, L&D acts like this fast food drive-through, right? Where you said, well, here's, the 5 or the 3 module curse, without really questioning why, right? And I think this needs, or I think for me is part of this partnership that you framed earlier, right? That you are on eye level and that you can question why, and that you can also challenge, is this really the problem we're talking here about? And shouldn't we explore that first before we go into the solution? Which somehow feels still very hard for many L&D leaders to do.
Yes, it does. I agree with you. And it's because it's discomforting that they're taken out of their comfort zone. But this is a critical moment where you have to see the world in a different way. And to me, as soon as I hear a group of L&D people talk about AI and say, oh, we're really doing massive amounts of improvement in speed of content development, we're 60% faster or 30% faster. And I know that an audience that isn't L&D could not care less. Couldn't care less. Doesn't make any impact. If you say This is the way we're driving AI through the organization. We've taken a lead role along with technology and others to make sure this embeds itself in the workflow and it's controlled and managed in a proper way. Then people listen, because it's what you can contribute and to the overall picture, not what I do on my own. And one of the problems is that no finance director thinks that an organization runs on money alone. They think they've got an incredibly important role, but they don't honestly believe that you don't need anyone else to run an organization just full of finance people. Everything will be fine. But L&D people think that on their own, they can drive the organization, the learning and the capability in the organization. They can't. It's a partnership, and they have a role to play in partnership, which is why, just another area that drives me crazy is this nonsense about learning has to have ROI, has to prove itself by the return on the investment for learning. And there is no such thing as clean L&D, i.e. that what it does is so distinct that you can measure a percentage improvement. And anyone who says different, I think they're making it up. The truth is that the most successful learning is in partnership, and it's a bunch of all sorts of things happen at the same time, and L&D makes its contribution. So the best thing they can say is, this organization has grown by 10%. L&D had a big role in that, or a significant role in that, or even a small role in that, but at least it had a role. If it says, 8% of that 10% is down to L&D, you're talking rubbish. It's just not true. And the minute you try and isolate your own contribution, I think you're dead. You're absolutely dead. Because no CEO wants to say, well, out of this success last year, then 3% was here, and 8% was there, and 12% was there. The CEO wants to say, as a team, we cracked it. As an organization and the component parts, we cracked it. That's what everyone wants to hear. And L&D still haven't learned that lesson. That's not true to say. I'm saying something very generically. I think some L&D has not understood that point, that it's working. What can you contribute to the team? So I used to say to my staff, just when you're talking, go in with humility and work out what your contribution is and what partnership means. Don't say, give us that, we'll do it. Just leave it alone.
Yeah, I think something that I guess stops or prevents, exactly this partnership role is that there is, of course, a huge legacy, right, of, catalogs for learning, technology, processes, and so on that, of course, built up over the last, 10, 20 years. And they create a lot of, work to be done and a lot of kind of also noise. I think at one point you even called it LMS fetish, right?
Yes.
Where everyone is, so hung up with.
Yes.
How do you help L&D teams, or what would you recommend them, right, to cut through that, right, and really, leave, also things behind?
Yeah, I would say, let's start from scratch. Let's imagine there is no L&D. Mm-hmm. Let's imagine you're starting off from scratch, day one. What would you want? What would you want to be effective? And when they start to say, well, we need that, we need that, we need that. And you say, what about all the others, the 90% that you haven't mentioned? And you realize that the 90% could go quite happily. And sometimes you have to get rid of a whole load of stuff in order to be able to progress. And so many organizations spend their time preserving, because people got vested interests, stuff that is irrelevant. Now, I remember I knew very well the CLO from Procter & Gamble. She's retired now. But when the CEO, Lafley, came back, because the company was failing really badly, Lafley focused on success. What does success mean for us? And he went to Anne and he said, I want you to drop everything you're doing, release as much resource as possible, because we're focusing on this one area. And you've got to drive this through the organization from the senior team down to the lowest low. And that is a massive operation. And she did. And people screamed and shouted and said, my favorite course isn't gone. And what they did was they said, right, we're not going to do this anymore, but we'll help you find somewhere that will, and we'll pay for it. It doesn't matter. But we're concentrating on this one thing. And it worked. And Lafley couldn't have done it without Anne and the L&D team. But he wouldn't he would have gone crazy if they said, well, we've got about 5% capacity left after everything else. We'll try and fit it in 5%. He would have just gone berserk because the organization was stumbling. And it's a great organization, a complex organization, and it needed big effort, concentrated communal effort. It was a real team thing. That was the organization learning, working together. So that was the biggest learning of our life, I think, of our career, having to start again in a way, start with that blank sheet of paper.
I feel like the big challenge here for L&D teams is to evolve their role, from this, course catalog to rather a part of the organization that, changes the design of work, right? And changes the design of work in a way that learning is a more integral part of it. And this means, a certain courage also to demand structural change. And I wanted to double check this with you, because I feel like this is maybe also another part of this wisdom of yours that it's about so much more than a learning course.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and what you're saying is absolutely right. It's part of rebuilding work. Work is going to change fundamentally over the next few years, fundamentally. And the idea that L&D is building courses over here somewhere and not right at the heart of that transformation is ridiculous, ridiculous. So yes, this is about organizations remaking themselves for a new age. Just as when mass production came in, organizations had to restructure. Just when IT came in, organizations had to restructure, reorganize. Just when the internet came in, organizations had to restructure and reorganize. And this is the next big shift. And I hope, I pray that organizations turn out very differently in 5 years' time. And I think they will be more cooperative, more communicative, more holistic, and more decent and kind than they are at the moment. Because the age requires that. It requires more community and more connection. Someone has to engineer that. And if that's not L&D, you're missing the best opportunity of your entire career, I think.
Wow. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I mean, there's thousands of more questions that I would love to ask, but I want to land us building this future, right? And creating this future. I love this, how you put it at BBC, inviting people to create this future. Works with experiments. And I said, cautiously experience, because you are not a fan of pilots. I learned that as well, right? Because pilots always amplify, the certain success, and experiments, they have, this idea it could fail, more maybe, ingrained into the words. So if you now look into this future and what you just said, right, what are the experiments that L&D teams should, keep on doing, start doing, also now pulling all your kind of wisdom right now and insights, in inventive events, those conferences you attend, this, L&D leaders you talk to, what are the experiments that you feel like they are kind of pointing the way? They are signals for this future that an L&D team, should investigate, should start to play around. And I also loved how you framed it, that there's, every L&D should always have those at least 2 scrappy experiments running. If not, they are doing something wrong.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And scrappy is the word. I think it's just you minimum viable. Just do what will give you an indication of what might be something much more sophisticated in the future. But to me, and I would say this, but to me, L&D has to build those communities, those learning communities. So I think we've got a long way to run with communities of practice. If L&D isn't the heart of getting people to share their expertise and knowledge and create pathways so that people can grab that knowledge and experience when they need it. So it's to in some ways, L&D is the architect of opening up the intelligence, the knowledge, the experience, and the resources which are inherent in the organization, but have to be made available to everyone else. And if they can do that, if they can connect the organization to itself and make it at the heart all about learning and sharing and supporting, it's got an amazing role for the future. If it's all about developing courses on elaborate PowerPoint systems, there's no future. Because why would you need to bother? To give you an example, I have a friend who in Australia is doing some work with me on agentic AI, and he said, I realized when Claude helped me completely build an API and website and engineer some ideas that would have taken 6 months and cost a fortune normally. He said, I realized that my whole career I've been building e-learning and it's a waste of time. So I'll never, ever build any e-learning again. I don't need to. I just say, Claude, I need to understand this. How do I do it? Claude, how do I build those? And not just Claude, there are obviously other options, but it's that idea that you've got someone who sits on your shoulder who will guide you through any new complexity. Why you don't need a course to do that. You just need to do it with some assistance and support. So we're kind of back to Socrates, really. We're back to sitting, listening to the genius, but the genius is actually available to every single person. So you get this incredible opportunity to have knowledge on your shoulder, whispering in your ear for you, guiding you, and knowledge in the community, helping the community be more knowledgeable, more successful, more sharing, more caring, more experimenting. That to me is the essence, the building block of a great organization in this century. And L&D has a very big role to play in that, or nothing. There's no two ways. It's either going to be right at the heart of it, or it's going to be dead. And that's a kind of depressing picture. But if that's what happens, that's what happens. It's not the end of the world. The key thing is that people continue to work effectively and do good work through their careers. That's the basic. For me, that's the fundamental. How do you do good work?
I'll come to my last question. And it's also maybe on a personal note. I think for me, one of the big role models of our time, is Sir David Attenborough.
Yes.
And you have been working with him. I know that he was part of.
Well, I've met him. Yes, I didn't do very much.
Yeah, but I met him. Yeah, he still is. I think one of the main drivers for BBC and the documentary business, of course. But
yes.
For me, he also represents this idea of a lifelong learner, which isn't always a positive image you associate with lifelong learning, right? But he somehow does. And so I was asking myself, what can we learn from David Attenborough as L&D community, as leaders, when it comes to learning?
The most obvious one when you meet him is humility. David Attenborough does not walk in the room as a superstar with a big cape on and look at me. He comes in quietly and has humility and he's very modest about what he's achieved, which is amazing on a global scale. The second thing you learn from David Attenborough is he listens to people. If you ask him a question, he's listening. He doesn't come in and I know everything. And the third thing is David Attenborough is focused 100% on delivery, doing stuff. It's not about pontificating. It's not about arguing. It's not about building a course. David Attenborough is a man who does stuff. And those three things, the humility, the listening, and doing stuff, great lessons for L&D in my mind. The best lessons ever. So stick with David Attenborough. He's a good guy.
And stick with Nigel. I mean, thank you so much. There's been so much in it. I mean, yeah, I have goosebumps right now, and I would love to continue, but I get signs from Tanya that we have to come to the end. Maybe there's a part 2 one day.
Yes, yeah. I'm very happy to do a part 2. Maybe you can hold me to it. You can come back in 2 years and say, what's happened? It doesn't seem to be just like you predicted. Or you might say, wow, you got it right. Hold me to account. I quite like being held to account.
I will do that. It has been an honor. It will be an honor. Thank you for letting us part of the wisdom of your experience in L&D. Because I feel, as I said at the beginning, I'm a big fan of wisdom, not because I have so much of it, but because I feel there is so much we can, take from it as orientation in this, windy times and in this kind of phase of change and massive change ahead. So I think, this wisdom kind of pulls us through, guides us through. And I thank you for sharing yours, because there is so much in it.
I'm glad you found it useful. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed the conversation. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you
Thank
so
you for
much,
your
Nigel.
time. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you for yours.
No problem.